Hey guys, this is Midweek Analysis for January 25th of 2023. Okay, we'll start off with the pound dollar. This is a weekly chart. We'll start off with an overview of the current setup I was looking at. So the last weekly short trade, that form was right here. And the last weekly long trade, that form was right here 3 weeks ago. And so the risk parameters for this weekly bias was between this pivot high and this pivot low right here. Now, in order to know whether this bias was long or short, I was waiting for the lower time frame confirmations to confirm this bias. So in other words, I was waiting for the lower time frame confirmations to confirm whether this pivot high right here will be touched before this pivot low or vice versa. Okay, however, lower confirmation never formed, and this week this top risk parameter was hit, and so at this point this weekly bias is reset back to neutral. Okay, so I'll be looking for further weekly and daily biases on this pair in the coming weeks. Okay, but just for educational purposes, let's go over what happened on the lower time frames here. Let's go over to the 4-hour chart. Okay, so on this 4-hour chart, those weekly risk parameters was between this pivot high and this pivot low right here. Okay, and after that weekly long trade formed roughly in these areas, as price bounced around, I was looking for lower time frame confirmation to confirm this bias. And so if you recall, I was looking at this trend line from this pivot to this pivot for a possible lower confirmation. However, as you can see, price never reached this trend line to confirm this bias. And then last week, price jetted all the way up to that main risk parameter level, just shy of it. And just this week, we had another push up to reach that risk parameter. And so at this point, this weekly bias is reset back to neutral. Okay, one thing I do want to add is that lower time confirmations can form on any time frame below the time frame that the bias formed. Now on these forecasts, if there's a weekly bias, I basically only show the 4-hour confirmations. Now that's because if I use the even lower time frames, like the 1 hour or 15-minute chart, there's a very high probability that the bias will be confirmed in both directions, resetting it over and over. Okay, and that's going to make it impossible for me to keep updating these forecasts along with each new lower confirmation. Okay, however, that said, like in this bias's case, although there was no 4-hour confirmation, if you dig all the way down to the 1 hour and 15-minute charts, there likely is a lower confirmation. Okay, so it's a good idea to actually look for those lower time frame confirmations for educational purposes. And if you have any questions about it, please leave it in the comments. Okay, so let's go on to the dollar-yen pair. Okay, this is the daily chart. Let me run you by the current setup I'm looking at. So the last daily short trade that formed was right here, and the last daily long trade formed right here. And so the risk parameters was between this pivot high and this pivot low right here. At the current moment, I'm waiting for lower time frame confirmations to confirm this bias. So let me go ahead and show you what I'm looking at. Let's go over to the 1-hour chart. Okay, so on this 1-hour chart, that daily risk parameter is between this pivot high and this pivot low right here. Okay, now first of all, try drawing this trend line from this pivot to this pivot right here. Now right at this point right here, we had a breakout and immediate break back in, which will typically create normal long strength, thus helping to confirm this daily bias. However, in this case, this trend line is not legitimate in my opinion. Now the reason is because the distance between each pivot is ever so slightly not equal. Okay, now this one is a very hard one to tell, but a general rule of thumb in lower confirmations is that if you have any doubt about the legitimacy of a trend line, right at that point that you have any slight doubt, you should rule out that trend line. Okay, because you want to remember, biases form all the time, and we want to pick the best trade setups possible. Okay, so this normal long strength that formed right here, I'm not going to count as legitimate. All right, however, there is a trend line that is legitimate, and that's from this pivot to this pivot right here. Now, if price could come up to this trend line, break it out, and immediately break back in, that's going to create normal short strength. However, if price can override that normal short strength and come up to this pivot right here, that will create strong long strength and thus confirm that daily bias to be long. Or in other words, price is likely to reach this pivot high before reaching this pivot low, which makes the target at this point right here and the stop loss right here. And so after this strong long strength forms, if I could get a pullback to about 128, I'll be willing to take a long entry with a stop loss of about 100 pips. Okay, so we'll just see what happens with this one, and I'll keep you guys updated, guys. And that's it for the midweek analysis, guys. I hope you guys have a great rest of the week. Thanks for watching, guys. Goodbye.